Dave Zirin, sports editor at The Nation. He's also at edgeofsports.com. Dave, tell me, we heard that we have this deal made in the NBA between owners and players. Season's going to start around Christmas Day. Looks like 66 games instead of the normal 82 are going to be played. Tell us about the deal, first of all, and most importantly, the argument was about money, but what was the conclusion in terms of the revenue split that is going to be achieved here?
Well, first of all, the basic contours of the deal, believe it or not, are still yet to be worked out. That's what all the parties say. So there are all kinds of things which have proven to be very hot button issues, like how old a player has to be to enter the NBA draft, or whether or not players can be sent down to the developmental league, which is like the NBA minor league, with a drastic reduction in salary. I mean, all of these things which made a lot of media coverage during the negotiations still have yet to even be decided or worked out, which really pulls the curtain back and shows that what this was really about was about money and about control. And when it comes to money and control, the owners trounced in this negotiation. And we're talking about $3 billion estimated revenue over the next decade will go from the pockets of players to the pockets of owners, with no attendant guarantees that money will be spent on teams, with no money that will be spent on, say, lower ticket prices, for example, for fans. Just that a group of owners, a group of the filthiest rich people on this planet, just got a lot richer. That's what this comes down to at the end of the day, once all the smoke is cleared and the bells and whistles are gone. NBA owners wanted more money, and they got it.
What's interesting about this to me is we've talked about before, you and I think last time it was related to NFL football versus basketball, the idea that many people hear about these stories and they say, it's millionaires versus billionaires. They're all in the top 1%. I don't care. That's it. And then you, when it came to football, you made a very specific argument saying, you know, a lot of the guys you don't hear about on TV, the linebackers, the linemen, etc., they have very short careers. They actually don't make that much money. Once they're out of the league, they have absolutely no health care. They have significant health problems, shorter lifespans. So even though it might seem like they're making good money while they're in the league, this is a big deal. What they make versus what owners make is totally different. Can you explain how that is different or similar with NBA players?
I think it's more similar than it's different. I mean, the differences in some respects are minor. Typical NFL player plays 3.5 years. Typical NBA player plays 6 years. When you talk about socioeconomics, the backgrounds are very similar. A lot of the racial dynamics are almost identical in that all NFL owners are white. Every NBA owner, save Michael Jordan, is white. The percentages are very similar in terms of athletes of color relative to white athletes. I mean, so a lot of the dynamics are the same. The main difference, and there are two, is one, public relations. The NFL did a terrific job of communicating to the public why this was not billionaires versus millionaires, why it was deeper than that. And the other issue is something you alluded to, is the issue of health and injury. I mean, NBA players, make no mistake about it, do get their shares of torn muscles, bumps, and bruises. They're sore when they get out of bed in the morning when they're 50 years old, no doubt about it. But that doesn't compare to the incredibly just brutal life of a former NFL player in terms of the basics, like brushing your teeth, picking up your kids. Things like that are things that for NFL players become a luxury after retirement. And I think that did have an effect in terms of making fans more sympathetic to the players' cause when it comes to the NFL. That and the fact that I think fans would have been in full rebellion if the NFL season hadn't started on time, and it was NFL owners like the NBA owners who are locking out the players, not vice versa. But in the NBA, the significant less this level of popularity of the NBA relative to the NFL made a difference, but I really do think it was also a communication issue. The NBA players let themselves be tagged as the whining millionaires in a period of economic duress and did very little to actively combat that on a PR level.
You know, I start to think to myself, what about the owners realizing or not realizing that a delayed season or no season could really have a permanent effect on the fan base, right? I mean, I'm a big Celtics fan, but if there were absolutely no season this year, I don't know that I'd be that into it come next November. If there was a whole
Right.
year where, because of contract negotiations, no matter which side was holding it up, I as a fan would be less into it. Do you think the owners knew that? Do you think the players knew that? Did either side care? Was there a sense of urgency?
Well, there was a sense of urgency, certainly on behalf of the players. I mean, and the urgency was less about fans and more that any economic analysis of it showed that even if the owners got everything they wanted, it was worth it to the players to accept it because when you only have a 6 year playing career, you're talking about 1/6 on average of your career income if you sit out the whole season. So there was an urgency there on behalf of the players that was less because of the owners. Because honestly, and this is where you get to the whole issue about what a complete sham the owner's position was. Owners don't. This is all about. They were saying they wanted to restore profitability with their clubs. But if you're an NBA owner, more likely, with very few exceptions, and I can list the exceptions on one hand, maybe even one finger, Donald Sterling of the LA Clippers. That team is not your business. That team is not your economic life. It is a hobby, and it's also something that you leverage for your other businesses. Like a picture, for example, the Maloof brothers, who own several casinos in Las Vegas and own the Sacramento Kings. The ability for them to say, hey, we also own this team, as a way to get other prospective business partners into their Las Vegas holdings. So you never really got a clear view of how lucrative it is to actually be a pro sports owner in the United States. So I think they cared very little about whether or not there would actually be a season this year, with some exceptions for sure. But for most owners, hey, better to win the long-term war and control this league again than the short-term battle of just making sure there's product on the court so you can keep the turnstiles moving.
Last question in the last 30 seconds or so we have left here. Even though we've pointed out very eloquently all the reasons why this is not just as simple as millionaires versus billionaires, given that there are so many lower middle class workers that are really in very significant situations, over a couple $100 towards their 401k or their health insurance, can you see why a lot of people would have that reaction when they talk about these, I don't know, 300 or 400 pro basketball players, and they say, you know what, in the end, I can't even pay the $100 I need to get my kids' co-pays covered. Do you understand some of that frustration?
Absolutely, it's understandable, but I also understand the frustration of people who are in those situations who point at things like six-figure salaries that some auto workers make, or public sector workers, or the very high-end public school teachers in New York State who get upwards of about $100,000. At the end of the day, though, it becomes a question of are we really going to point the fingers at? I mean, are we going to point the fingers at those who have strong unions and who've been able to get a decent standard of living and decent benefits, or are we going to point our fingers at the true 1%, like the people who actually control the production in our society? And in the NBA, to me, that makes it a no-brainer argument. I mean, you've got the people from the poor backgrounds who get to play 6 years and earn whatever they can. And then you've got the people with generational wealth, generation after generation, trying to get even wealthier. To me, that while I can understand why someone would be angry at someone, being paid all this money to play a game, it fails the test when you actually shine a light on it and look at two sides and ask yourself the question, which side am I on in this case? If one side wins, does it actually affect me, even psychologically, in a better way than if that side may have lost? And to me, that makes it actually a very dreary result that the players had to take it on the chin in this round.
Dave Zirin, sports editor at The Nation, and he's also at edgeofsports.com. Great to talk to you again, Dave.
Absolutely, David. Thank you.